Has this ever happened to you? You're in a heat so intense, the world outside looks like a mirage, something unreal. Well, what if I told you that sometimes something in that mirage is looking back? Here at Nightmare at 3 a.m., we explore the stories born from that fever dream. If that thought gave you a chill, your like helps us find more stories like this one. Subscribe to join our nightly vigil. And the question I'll leave you with for the comments is, have you ever seen something out in the heat that shouldn't have been there? My name is Silas, and I am 78 years old. Since my Martha passed away 2 years ago, the days have seemed to drag by as slowly as a dripping faucet. I have lived in the same apartment in Phoenix for 40 years, a place that used to be filled with laughter and the smell of her stew. Now the only smell is dust and heavy silence. My daughter Sarah lives in Oregon. She calls me every Sunday, always worried. "Are you eating well, Dad? Don't forget your medicine." I always say yes, but the truth is that most of the time I just don't feel like it. This summer, however, is different. It's not just the loneliness that oppresses me, it's the heat. The TV calls it a historic heat dome. To me, it's hell on earth. The thermometer hasn't dipped below 110 degrees Fahrenheit in a week. My window air conditioner, a noisy Christ-old contraption, groans and struggles to spit out air that's only slightly less stifling than the air outside. Going outside is impossible. The street below, 3 stories up, shimmers and undulates in the sun, a desert of asphalt that no one dares to cross. I feel like a prisoner in my own home, an astronaut marooned on a too-hot planet, with only the sickening hum of my air conditioner and my memories for company. The first strange thing I noticed wasn't something I saw, but something that was gone. I have a habit of keeping a glass of water on my bedside table. In this heat, I wake up several times during the night with my mouth as dry as sandpaper. On Tuesday, I woke up around 3 a.m. The air was particularly thick. I reached for the glass and found it completely empty. I was sure I had filled it before going to sleep. I must have drunk it all, and I don't remember. I muttered to the darkness. Age does that to us. It erases the little things. The next afternoon it happened again, but in a weirder way. I was sitting in my recliner watching an old baseball game when I heard a sound, a loss, coming from the living room window. It was a dull, rhythmic sound. I thought maybe it was the heat making the old window frame creak. That's what old houses do under stress. But the sound seemed intentional. I kept listening to it for about 10 minutes, always in the same rhythm. "It's just the heat, Silas," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "You've been alone too long. You're starting to hear things." It was the only explanation that made sense. It was easier to believe that my mind was playing tricks on me than to consider anything else. My logic broke on Thursday. The tapping on the window had stopped, but it was replaced by something much worse. I was in the kitchen trying to work up an appetite for a sandwich when I looked out the living room window, and I saw it. Across the street, standing next to a rusty fire hydrant, was a figure. It wasn't a normal person taking shelter in the little shade there was. She was tall, too thin, and seemed to vibrate along with the heat rising from the asphalt. It was like looking at a dark spot in reality itself. I stood there, bread in hand, for minutes, waiting for the figure to move, for a car to pass. for something to prove that it was real. She didn't move. She seemed to be looking directly at my building. My heart started beating faster. My first reaction was to call Sarah. "Dad, is everything okay? You don't usually call during the week." "Sarah, there's a man standing across the street. He's not moving. It's so hot. It's not normal." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Dad, have you been drinking water? The heat can make you see things. It's probably nothing. Probably just someone waiting for a bus." "There's no bus stop there, honey. And he doesn't look right." "Dad, please move away from the window and have a glass of water. I'll call you later to see if you're okay?" She hung up. I knew what that tone meant. It was the tone she used when she thought I was confused. In that moment, I felt completely helpless. There was living proof of my anxiety across the street, but to the only person I could talk to, it was just a symptom of my old age and the heat. I was alone with this. By Friday, the figure was closer. It had crossed the street. Now it stood directly beneath my window at the edge of the sidewalk outside my building. The midday sun beat down on it, but it didn't seem to care. From my third-floor window, I could see details that made me sick. It wasn't a man. Its skin, if it was skin at all, was dark and cracked like a dry riverbed. Its limbs were too long and too thin, with joints that seemed to be in the wrong place. It had no face, just a smooth, dark surface that absorbed the light. I spent the whole day away from the window with the curtains closed, but I could feel its presence. It was like a pressure in the air, a heat that didn't come from the sun. At night, the worst happened. With a metallic groan and a smell of smoke, my air conditioner died. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise, and it was in that silence that I heard a new sound, a dry, dragging sound coming from downstairs. Shh, shh, the sound of something heavy being dragged slowly across the sidewalk. My control was slipping away. I was a cornered animal, waiting for the predator to come up the stairs. Locked in my room, with a chair propped against the doorknob, sweat ran down my face in rivulets. The shuffling sound had stopped just below my window. Silence returned, thick and expectant. I crept to the bedroom window, which also faced the front of the building, and peered through a crack in the curtain. The figure was there, staring up. Then something impossible happened. The glass in my window began to fog up from the inside, as if someone was blowing cold air on it. But how? The apartment was an oven. The air outside was fire, and in the condensation that formed on the hot glass, an invisible finger began to draw, letter by letter, a single word formed glistening with moisture in the hot, dry night. A scream caught in my throat. It broke my mind. How was that possible? How could something be so cold in this heat? How could it write on my window? Any doubts about my sanity evaporated, replaced by pure, utter terror. The thing out there wasn't just watching me, it was communicating. It knew my thirst, it knew my weakness, and it was mocking me. I grabbed the phone and called Sarah, screaming incoherently. I don't remember what I said, only that I cried and begged for help. Sarah must have called emergency services. About an hour later, I heard a loud knock on my door. "Mr. Miller, this is the fire department. We've received an emergency call." With shaking hands, I dragged the chair over and opened the door. Two strong young men looked at me with concern. "Are you okay? It's too hot in here. We're going to take you to a cooling center." The escape. The relief was so intense that my legs gave out. They helped me down the stairs, wrapping me in an emergency blanket, which felt like a cruel joke. As we stepped out into the street, the hot air hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I was safe. I was escaping. As one of the firefighters helped me into the ambulance, I looked back one last time at the window of my apartment. The word thirst was gone. But for an instant, just a split second, I saw it. Behind the dark glass of my room, I saw a silhouette, tall and slender. She was standing within from my apartment, looking at me. The ambulance door closed and the siren blared. But the cold I felt had nothing to do with the vehicle's air conditioning. Terror settled in my stomach like a block of ice. The creature wasn't trying to get in. I don't know what it was or how long it had been there. All I know is that the heat didn't bring it in. The heat just made it thirsty, and I had just left my home for it. My name is Leo. I'm 20 years old, and to pay for college, I'm spending what feels like the hottest summer in Florida history, smelling of chlorine and sunscreen all over my skin. My job is to clean the pools of the rich. You know, those big houses in gated communities where the grass is greener than money and the silence is so heavy it hums. I spend 8 hours a day under an unforgiving sun, moving from one sterile yard to the next, a kind of ghost in a t-shirt and shorts. The heat wave has been going on for 3 weeks. The air is so humid, it feels like I'm breathing soup. The radio in my old truck keeps saying 110 degrees Fahrenheit. For me, it feels like I'm being slowly cooked inside my own skin. The money is good, I need it, but the loneliness and exhaustion are brutal. Work is a hypnotic routine, raking leaves with a net, brushing the pool walls, testing the pH of the water. The surface of the water, always shimmering in the sun, reflects a blinding white sky. Sometimes I stare at my own distorted reflection in the water and barely recognize myself. I'm just a tired, sweaty kid dreaming of the air conditioning in his tiny rented apartment. It started with small things. Things I found at the bottom of swimming pools. Things that shouldn't be there. The first week I was at the Patterson's house, I found an old yellowed bone button at the bottom of the shallow end. I thought it was odd, but I figured it had fallen out of someone's bathing suit. I threw it away and didn't think anything of it again. 2 days later, about 5 miles away at the Chen's house, I found a small rusty key in the drain at the bottom. One of those skeleton keys you only see in movies. Again, strange. The Chen's children were young. Maybe one of their grandparents had visited and lost it. I rationalized. Kids throw things in the pool. That's what they do. The heat messes with people's minds. Maybe they were just bored. But the thing kept going. A bent, unrecognizable coin in one pool, a single pearl earring in another. Always in impeccably clean pools, where my only job was to maintain the chemistry of the water. They were lonely, lost objects that seemed to carry a weight. Story. I picked them up and threw them in the trash, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I told myself it was a coincidence, a series of bizarre coincidences. It was easier to believe that than the growing sense that something or someone was leaving these little gifts for me to find. My ability to rationalize came crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon at the Holloway estate. It was one of those infinity pools, with the edge that seemed to blend into the lake beyond. As I scrubbed the walls, I noticed something at the bottom of the deepest part. It wasn't an object. It was stains. 5 dark spots arranged in an arc on the white plaster at the bottom of the pool. They looked like fingerprints, as if someone with soot-stained fingers had pressed their hand there. But that didn't make sense. The water should have dispersed any dirt, and these spots looked fixed, sharp, as if they had burned into the plaster itself. My heart raced. I picked up my phone and called my boss, Dave. Dave, you need to see this. There are some weird marks on the bottom of the Holloway's pool. They look like burns. Dave huffed on the other end of the line. Burns underwater? Leo, have you been drinking on the job? No, I swear, it looks like a hand. It's weird. Look, kid, I don't have time for this. It's probably black algae. Use more chlorine and brush hard. And stop calling me with bullshit. He hung up. I felt a wave of frustration and helplessness. I walked back to the edge of the pool, determined to take a picture, but the spots were gone. The sunlight, reflecting off the ripples in the water, made the background a shimmering blur. Maybe Dave was right. Maybe the heat, the exhaustion, maybe I was seeing things. But the image of those 5 dark spots was etched in my mind. They weren't algae. They were a warning. From that day on, fear became my work companion. I began to feel that I was not alone in those silent backyards. I began to see things in the reflections of the water. It was always a fleeting glimpse. As I leaned over the pool, my own reflection looked wrong. Behind me, on the shimmering surface of the water, I saw the silhouette of another person. Tall, thin, standing near a tree or a pillar in the courtyard. Every time I turned around, in a flash, there was no one there. The courtyard was empty, silent except for the buzzing of cicadas. It happened 3 times in 2 days in different houses. The figure in the reflection was always the same, a dark, distorted smudge like a glitch in reality. The smell of chlorine began to mingle with another odor, faint and intermittent, a smell of wet ash. The confirmation that I wasn't crazy came on Friday. I was at the Garcia's house around 2 p.m., the height of the heat. I bent down to pick up a lone leaf and saw the reflection again. The dark figure was standing right behind me. This time, panic paralyzed me. I didn't turn around. I just stared at the reflection, and slowly, the figure in the water raised a long, thin arm and pointed, not at me, but down, toward the bottom of the pool. My heart in my throat, I looked away from the reflection and forced my eyes to focus on the bottom of the water. And I saw it. For a single, terrifying second, the dark figure was no longer in the reflection. It lay on the bottom of the pool, limbs outstretched, looking up at me. Its form was made of a darkness that seemed to suck the blue light from the water around it. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it dissolved into the dancing lines of light at the bottom of the pool, leaving me alone, panting, the sun burning my back. I was going to give up. Enough. No paycheck was worth that. I decided I would do my last house of the day and then call Dave and tell him I was out. The last house was the Millers, an elderly couple who rarely used their pool. I hoped it would be a quick job. When I arrived, the pool was perfect, crystal clear, without a single leaf. I felt an immense relief. Okay, just test the water and go, I thought. I dipped the net into the water out of habit, just to skim the surface one last time. When I lifted it, something was caught in the mesh. It wasn't a button or a key. It was a tuft of long, dark hair, and tangled in it was a folded, soggy piece of paper. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I unfolded the paper carefully. The ink, somehow impossible, hadn't smudged. It was a drawing, drawn with crayon like a child's. It showed a blue pool, and at the bottom, a stick figure lying down. Beside the pool was another stick figure, taller, holding a net. Me. Above the drawing, a single word was written in shaky capital letters. Help. My brain froze. How? How did that get there? Whose drawing was it? How did the ink not smudge? Logic shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't a ghost haunting me. It was a cry for help, a request being delivered by an entity I couldn't understand. What had happened in that pool? What did that dark figure want me to do? Doubt about my sanity was replaced by a different kind of terror, the terror of responsibility. I wasn't being haunted. I was being contacted. That was the last straw. Responsibility or not, I couldn't deal with it. I threw the net to the ground, dropped all my gear, and ran to my truck. I called Dave on speakerphone as I sped out of the condo. Dave, I quit. Now. What? Leo, what are you talking about? I hung up. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the air conditioning on full blast, trying to freeze the panic inside me. The sun finally began to set, painting the sky orange and purple. I arrived at my apartment exhausted. All I wanted to do was take a shower and wash the day away from me. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the hottest water I could handle, needing to feel something other than the oppressive heat of the sun. The small room quickly filled with steam, the mirror fogging up completely. I closed my eyes, letting the water run down my body. For a moment, I felt a fleeting peace. When I was done and turned off the shower, the mirror was a blank slate of condensation. I reached out to wipe it away with my hand, but I stopped. On the cloudy surface of the mirror, something was appearing. Small dark marks slowly forming in the condensation. They were handprints, small, childlike hands. One appeared, then another beside it, and another. They weren't disappearing. They were becoming clearer, as if tiny, invisible, wet hands were pressed against the other side of the glass, trying to get my attention. The air froze in my lungs. I had fled to pools, but not what lived in them, or worse, the entity in the reflections, the figure at the bottom of the water. It wasn't the ghost, it was the predator. And the souls trapped in those pools, the ones that left the objects, the drawings, they weren't asking me to help them. They were asking me to help the next person, because now I had brought him home with me. My name is Chloe. 3 months ago, my husband Mark and I moved to a new house in one of those planned suburbs in Texas. 2 weeks later, he was sent off to long-term training, leaving me alone with our 1-year-old son, Sam, and a heat wave that the media has called apocalyptic. The temperature outside hasn't dipped below 100 degrees in days. Our lives have shrunk to the space between these 4 walls, an air conditioner on high, games on the living room floor, and the constant hum of the baby monitor next to me. The house, being new, is eerily quiet. There are none of the creaks and groans of a place with history. There is only the heavy silence and the hum of electricity, a sound that seems to amplify my loneliness and the anxiety of being the sole caretaker of such a small life in the midst of a world that seems to be melting away. It started 2 nights ago. The heat has made Sam's sleep more restless. I keep the baby monitor on my nightstand, listening for any mumbling. That's when I heard it. Beneath Sam's soft, rhythmic breathing, there was another sound, a low noise like radio static, barely audible. At first, I blamed it on interference. New houses, lots of appliances, maybe a neighbor's signal was crossing mine. I went to his room. Sam was sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling. The room was completely silent. I went back to bed, and the noise was still there, a faint hiss coming only from the small speaker. The next night, the static sounded different, more rhythmic, almost like a whisper, dry and indecipherable. It's the exhaustion, I told myself. It's the heat and lack of sleep. I was desperate to believe it. Today, the heat peaked. Around 3 o'clock, the lights flickered and the air conditioner died with a dull thud. The silence that followed was total and terrifying. The heat began to seep into the house immediately, making the air heavy and hard to breathe. Sam began whimpering in his room. I grabbed the baby monitor to go to him, and in the absolute silence, the speaker crackled. The static, the whispering was back, but this time without the hum of the air conditioner to compete, it was perfectly clear. It wasn't interference. It was a voice, an old voice, thin and dry, like dry leaves rubbing together. She said, with a clarity that chilled my blood, "He has his father's eyes." I remember. I stood frozen in the middle of the hallway. I remember. The phrase echoed in my mind. The voice wasn't coming from another house. The baby monitor wasn't picking up a stray signal. It was just amplifying the sound that was already in my son's room. The heat didn't bring anything into my house. It just silenced everything else, enough so that I could finally hear the person who already lived here, the person who never left. And now, in the suffocating silence, I stood between my door and my son's door, understanding that we were never alone.